So this drawing is a drawing that we produced when we were working on the Olympics and the Olympic legacy, and it was a drawing showing a potential connection between the Olympic Park and Hackney Wick, which lay to the west of the site. And it was a drawing which was about connections and how we make connections out of the park. It was a drawing about scale and the sort of building that we thought might be built. And it was also a drawing about use and the sorts of activities that might go on there. And those sort of three words, connections, uses, and scale, I've written out in another way for the purposes of today with three slogans, which to me are very important issues to deal with when one's talking about trying to make really successful places. Now, these linking the Olympic site up was hugely important in the development of the master plan. We were interested in the way in which the Olympic Park could, all that investment could grow outwards and feed the areas adjacent to it. And so we did a lot of drawings which were done in order to understand how people moved around the site when we began in 2000 and how they might move around the site in the future. And that simple idea of linking new development up with existing is, I think, a hugely essential part of a way in which one thinks about place. And when you look at this plan, which is a plan of King's Cross in London, you can see again that we begin really with a sense of a kind of analysis and understanding about all the ways in which people move around the site. And that understanding then gets fed directly in to the planning of the new site or the site we're working with as a kind of underpinning framework of capillaries for movement, which then inform the way the place evolves. And at King's Cross, I think particularly, one is very aware of the way, because it is so well connected in now to the city that surrounds it, it has been much more successful than one might have imagined in terms of attracting the local community to come in and use the space every day in a very informal way, and enjoy what the public realm can offer to them as a location which is now, I think, really has enriched the lives of what are in fact relatively deprived communities who are living in the areas immediately adjacent to the site. And what's fascinating is that, of course, it's wonderful on a lovely sunny day, but even on a kind of bleak grey day, still a place like this can have a role really in contributing to the lives of the people who live round about it. And when we were working on the project, we had to try very hard really to communicate this aspiration. And one of the things we did was to take the old London A to Z map. We don't really use it anymore, but we did then, and look at how King's Cross appeared in that map then, and then make it clear that in the master plan for King's Cross, we were simply growing the city into it. This wasn't an isolated place. It was absolutely connected back into its neighbouring communities. The other thing which I think was important at King's Cross was thinking about all the uses that might go on in it. I mean, yes, the majority are residential and office uses, but we looked very carefully at the ground floors of all the buildings and how other uses might be distributed both during the day and equally during the night, so we could get a kind of understanding of that. And one of the hugely important moments at King's Cross was actually when our client, when Argent, agreed with the University of the Arts London, the Central St Martin's, the art college, might move onto the site, and their arrival immediately changed the character of the place and the degree to which people wanted to be there. And I think, again, that's a really important aspect of these projects, that it's wrong to see them as a single use or one type of place. It's much more enriching to see them as a multiplicity of different uses. And at King's Cross, what's been very interesting is to see the way in which within these kind of essentially kind of residential or office areas, we've tried to achieve, and particularly Argent have tried to push the whole time the drawing in of other uses, which all the time begin to enrich the place and ultimately make it a place that more and more people want to both work in or live in, but also want to go and visit. And that change for us as architects and master planners changed our view about these projects, really realizing that in the end, what we had to do, it was always going to be better in a way, the greater the mix of uses were that we were able to introduce into the site. And that process has kind of carried on all the way through, with the last sort of big change in the scheme being the decision that Google took to move into the site and build a building which is now well underway, which has been designed by Thomas Heatherwick and Big, the Danish architects, Bjarke Ingels. And in a way, it seems completely obvious and one might do that, but it's fascinating to remind oneself really that this is actually a big change. In the middle of the last century, all the thrust in urban planning was to separate things out, separate different uses out. This is from the 1944 Greater London Plan, the wonderful plan really done by Abercrombie. And it's two drawings of Shoreditch. And the one on the left is the analysis of Shoreditch as it existed then, with all these different uses scattered over the whole place. And the one on the right is as the 1944 planners wanted to see it, with everything separated out. And really what we're now doing is trying to take almost the opposite view again. We're seeing the benefits of mixing. And in another piece of kind of planning from that era, there was a sense in which this separating out of uses would begin to be projected at a kind of strategic way in the planning of the city. This is the Festival Hall site with the Queen Elizabeth Hall and Hayward Gallery on the left. And this is what it felt like when we began our work about 15 years ago now on reordering the Festival Hall, and particularly trying to change the way this building related to the public realm. This is what it looked like actually when the Queen Elizabeth Hall was being built, and the spaces had no life really, other than when they were animated by the concert taking place in the hall. And what we were trying to do was, in a way, was to kind of turn the buildings inside out and to bring to life, therefore, the public realm round about them. And certainly in doing so, what we also were doing was bringing investment actually into the building. So now these buildings can be funded in the long term because of the activity and life which is being generated around them. Now, that sort of way of thinking was, I think, absolutely implicit in much planning that went on in the last century, which believed fundamentally in separating things out, separating buildings out, separating uses out. This is a plan of Harlow Newtown, where every little neighbourhood was separated from every other neighbourhood by areas of green space. And our interest really as urbanists has been much more in the power of concentration, in the power of bringing things closer together, in reducing the scale of spaces and trying to recover that sense of atmosphere, of intensity, of intimacy, really, into our urban planning. And one of the places where we learnt about this was not in our master plan, but in one that was done in which we participated as architects. This is the area Paternoster Square to the north of St. Paul's, where the buildings were allowed to go incredibly closely together, 6 or 7 meters apart, and recreate a kind of quality which had been entirely lost in the post-war reconstruction. We wanted to try and do the same thing at King's Cross, and this is the model, a big model we made of King's Cross at a certain point in the project, where we were trying to talk with the planners about how closely we could build the buildings together and did we all believe in terms of the scale of the spaces. And that we've now built out. And I think when you walk around it now, one of the strongest senses you have, particularly in this southern part of the site, is this same sense of a kind of atmosphere that the buildings begin to generate, and the benefits that we're gaining from building buildings actually quite close together, quite closer together than everybody thought might have been a good idea. But I think it is what is proving successful about King's Cross, and is a lesson which I think we should learn as we move around and look at other similar projects elsewhere. And certainly we're trying now in our other master plans to think hard about the way buildings come together, and think hard about the kind of character of place that we can begin to construct through these sorts of relationships. Now, this is in Canada Water on the south side of the river. It's one of a group of 3 master plans we've been working on over the last few years. On the furthest east is Greenwich Peninsula, and in the middle lies Wood Wharf, which is an extension of Canary Wharf. And when you look at this view of it, you can see that it's a big scale project. They're very big buildings that are being proposed here. The difference with this and Canary Wharf is it's going to be much more mixed in terms of the uses that go into it. It's much more diverse than Canary Wharf is. And of course, in the end, the buildings are very, very important. But curiously, the models we made of Wood Wharf are actually much more about the ground plane, about the landscapes between the buildings, and the way in which each individual building has to contribute to the spaces round about. Now, this is a model made before we had architects for all the buildings, but it was a model trying to describe to designers how we expected their buildings to contribute to the way the public spaces are going to work. So it's a kind of intricate model, but really thinking about these relationships. And I suppose that's, in the end, the important thing to say here is that a kind of urban plan or a master plan can go only so far. In the end, it does require us as architects now, as people building individual buildings, to work very, very hard to make sure that our buildings make the contribution they need to make back towards the public space that we're designing. And in a way, I suppose we've tried to be that sort of good architect when in the building that we designed for ourselves, which is in Southwark, just south of Tate Modern, just south of the river, where in our ground floor of our building, we've tried to ensure that we make a very positive relationship out to the street, the way we give something back all the time to the street. We've done that in our reception space, which is the building on the left-hand side. We're also in the nice, beautiful Victorian building on the right-hand side. And in both buildings, we've tried to also add shops, and a shop and a restaurant, so that, again, we're making a real contribution back to the way the city works around us. Now, in our office, we face onto a building that we built, part of a group of 3 buildings at Bankside 1, 2, and 3. And those buildings were built to replace the 2 big slab blocks that you can see in almost in the foreground there. And you can see behind those slab blocks, you can actually see the roof extension to Tate Modern, sitting on top of the power station. You can see the wobbly bridge which crosses the river and brings people through from St Paul's in the distance. And in our scheme for the replacement of those 2 big slabs, which were a complete barrier to north-south movement, you can see that our buildings began to provide many more opportunities for you to move north-south. So you could improve the connections back to the river, and you could begin to generate active public spaces, but always spaces which are actually on routes, so that they're animated by the way that people can move through the city. They're not they're connected back in all the time. And that route which we've made between the new buildings at Bankside, and which does indeed go through the Tate and across the bridge and into the transepts of St Paul's, we knew that in our little building We could also take that route under our building in that passageway on the left-hand side. We could bring people through, and we could connect into the smaller scale lanes which lie to the south of our building. And so even on an individual building, if you like, we think that an architect can make a contribution to the way places work. We can feed them in terms of the routes and connections that we make. We can think about the way in which they can frame the scale of the spaces, and we can also think about them ultimately in terms of use. And even though our building faces onto the main road, and that's our kind of where our reception is, the windows on the left-hand side here of our building are actually windows that go into another building at the back, a small building with a little courtyard on one side of it, and the use which occupies the ground floor of our building is our model shop. So that we deliberately put our model shop there, facing onto this little kind of working mews at the back. And really, that's probably where I should end. But the point, I suppose, is that my slogans, which I've given you, are slogans for us, I think, as urbanists in thinking about the city and how it might work. But they're also slogans which I would like to feel that architects can also fully understand when they're designing individual buildings within our cities. Thank you.